Hi, everyone. I guess this sounds like it's on. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, good. Well, hi, everybody. It's been a couple years since I've been to this conference, and it's really nice to be back. And I look forward to catching up with a whole bunch of you while I'm here. I am going to skip across a couple of these. So first of all, let me just say the title of this talk. Whoops, go back. Which I'll explain why I called it this at the very end. And these slides will be made available after the fact. Bethany will make sure they're posted. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm a family doc, originally from California, trained in Seattle and ended up staying there, and was involved in starting up Qliance in 2007. Sounds like it's making some extra noise here. And ran the company for a lot of that time that it was around, for about 10 years. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is, as many of you know, Qliance had to shut its doors last year. And I know there's been a lot of speculation about what happened and what we can learn from it. So today I'm here to hopefully share some of that with you. It's a long and in some ways gory story. So I'm going to have to breeze over a lot of stuff. But please, whatever questions you have, enter them into the system, whatever it is. And they're going to hand that to me later. And we'll try to get through some of your questions. And then I'll make myself available later too. So I think we can skip through all of that. Okay, so let me first talk about what we were trying to do when we started Qliance. This thing is really, am I doing this, making the noise? How's that? So when we started Qliance, we were trying to take what had been up until then considered very much a service for the wealthy, sort of an add-on luxury for people who could afford to pay for more attentive care. And what we were trying to show was that it's actually a superior way to do primary care and solves for a lot of the bad incentives and other problems in our current system. We wanted to prove that it was adaptable to really any population, that it was supremely adaptable, actually, that it could be done at scale. We also wanted to show what a truly primary care-based system could do when you really put the primary care provider and the patient at the center of the equation and let them drive the process. And then we also wanted to find ways to integrate DPC into the rest of the healthcare system. So it was really sort of an attempt to build a grassroots effort, but at a larger scale to kind of accelerate what was happening already in the country. So how did we get started? Well, at the time we were thinking of doing this, there was just no way that we could come up with the money to do it and to back this kind of an effort without some significant help. And I actually took a lot of flack from a lot of my friends in the community clinic world and other areas who thought that I'd gone to the dark side when I said that we were going to be an investor-backed company. And I said, well, do you have any other ideas of how we can get money? Because I'm not personally wealthy, none of us are. Nobody's going to give us a loan for this. And getting grant money is a long process and very difficult and not going to happen there either. And so everyone kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, I guess you're right. So we were able to line up some investors, and we decided, all right, let's get planning, let's go. Well, the insurance commissioner of Washington quickly got wind of what we were trying to do and said, you're not going to do this, that's insurance, and I'm going to shut you down. So before we could even open our doors, the investor said, no money is going into your account until you get this fixed. So here's a little bit of money for lobbying, and go figure this out in Olympia, our state capital. So with lots and lots of work, we were able to get a law passed, and this was the first DPC law in the country. And as absurd as it may sound, we had to have a law passed that said that what we were doing was legal, that it was not insurance, that we were not an HMO, that we were not a healthcare services contractor, and therefore it was okay for individuals to pay us for this, but not employers. So we're like, all right, well, thankfully we got at least a foot in the door. We'll try to fix this later. So we opened our first clinic in downtown Seattle in the middle of 2007, and we were all excited, and we were going to be open 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we were crazy. We quickly changed that. Because there was nobody coming through the doors. We had about 25 patients and a huge monthly cost structure. So we started marketing to individuals. We were able to market to small businesses, but we had to be very, very careful about what we did. And meanwhile, we're actively working with the legislature trying to get amendments made to the law the following year so that we could actually market to larger groups. So then what happens? Well, 2008 comes and the Great Recession hits. Yay! That's a great thing for a new business that's basically underwater. So we had to kind of scramble and figure out what we were going to do. Well, it was a good and bad thing. On the one hand, it's terrible for business to have a recession. On the other hand, it did sort of force employers and other folks to think about alternative ways of doing insurance. And everyone started looking at high deductible plans as a more normal thing. When we started, a high deductible was $500, and now a high deductible is, whatever, $600, $700. So, and that's in 10 years. So we thought, hey, this is great. We're going to go around and say, look, employers, you have this difficult transition you have to make, telling your employees you're going to tear away from them these nice, rich benefits they've always had, and you're going to replace it with this high deductible plan, but then you're going to give them a health savings account. Again, yay. Except, then the IRS informs us, no, illegal to pay for direct primary care services with your HSA funds. So we said, great, now we got to work on this. So we start lobbying the IRS, we start working at the federal level, all that kind of stuff. Now, 10 years later, I'm sure a lot of you know about this, and if not, you'll hear more about it later today. It looks like we might finally get a fix to this problem. Again, absurd, right? This is medical services. All of us who do this, and any rational person would say, it's medical care. What's the problem? But it's assumed that it's being treated like a premium, like an insurance premium, and you're not supposed to pay for insurance premiums out of your HSA fund. So another big wall of resistance pops up. We quickly, as I mentioned, started to work on the employer market. We saw that, one of the lessons we learned along the way was that when you're trying to change things, you can't just go completely against the tide right off the bat and expect to make big strides. So there's a certain amount of, it's kind of like politics, right? You go in with a clear idea of what idealistically would be the best thing to do, and then it turns into sausage making and comes out to be something else. So we started to work with employers, and even though we really believed, and I still believe, that it's really not a good system to have employers be responsible for health insurance and health benefits coverage. It's a very inefficient, irrational way to do things. But that's the system we're stuck with. So we said, all right, let's try to really work on expanding in this market. But the progress was very painfully slow. Brokers were really reluctant to sell what we were doing with only a couple of clinics. By that time, we'd opened up our second clinic. So they said, you need a footprint. I said, well, how big is a footprint? Oh, I don't know, a few more clinics. So we had to go back to our investors and say, we need more money so we can open up more clinics. And oh yeah, we don't have business yet. We just have to build it and hope they will come. But we're confident that if we do that, we might actually get somewhere. So they agreed, more money, and we started to build out that footprint. At the same time, too, people wanted us to have proof already of the return on investment. And we said, well, how are we going to have a proof of return on investment without an opportunity to prove it? And this was a constant source of frustration. And we thought, if we can just find that one or two large customers who will provide us with data and be a good partner, we can gather the data quickly and show what a difference this is going to make. Bit by bit, moving forward, lots of stuff happened in this period, but I'm just going to highlight the main things. In 2011, we were able to sign Expedia. Well, this was really exciting. They seemed very knowledgeable and positive about the impact of primary care, and they also wanted a pseudo on-site clinic. They didn't want to have the full responsibility for the clinic and have it be closed to only their employees, but they wanted a clinic on site. So we did sort of a hybrid model of this and of an on-site clinic, and opened that in 2011. Well, we opened in 2012. And then in 2012, Comcast signed on for their local employees in Washington. Then we started expanding into the union market. We signed the United Food and Commercial Workers in Washington State. Then we got the Northwest Steelworkers Union, and then after that we got the Seattle Firefighters Healthcare Trust. And meanwhile, I was flying all over the country talking to unions everywhere about how great this could be for them. So all of that was really starting to go well. We were really starting to pick up the pace. The company was growing. We weren't yet profitable, but we looked like we were on some sort of trajectory to get there. And then finally, we had an opportunity to enter Medicaid. By sort of a fluke, as many of the states in the country were doing at the time, Washington had finally flipped over to completely contracting out all Medicaid to private Medicaid insurance companies. Basically Medicaid Managed Care Organizations, or MCOs. We were able to start a pilot with Centene in Washington. They have a subsidiary there called Coordinated Care. And we started out with just their most disabled population, about 1,200 people. And we ran that for about 6 months, and they were so impressed and said, this is just truly amazing what you guys are doing. People aren't going to the hospital anymore. We're saving hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is great. We'd like to expand our footprint with you. So then the ACA came along and said, well, let's expand Medicaid. Washington decided to do Medicaid expansion, and we're going to set up the exchange. And so Centene came to us and said, wow, we're getting a lot of people signing up, way more than we expected. And so we would like to have you take on more patients because you've done such a great job. And we said, that would be great. And by this time, Centene had also become an investor in our company, a minor investor, because they had decided that this was such a great thing. That's what I thought. In the course of the first half of 2014, they flooded us with patients. We took on 35,000 new members in 6 months. And that was on top of only 8,000 existing members. And we thought we were doing pretty good when we had 8,000 members, but we already had like 5 clinics. So that's not like exactly a sustainable number. By the way, my timer is not running. Is that possible to get that running? I have no idea how much time I have. That's a dangerous thing. Yay, thank you. Okay, meanwhile, we couldn't let down the effort on our political work. So we continued to work on tweaking the Washington state laws, as I mentioned. And then in 2010, approximately, we started working on the work started on the Affordable Care Act. And we said, uh-oh, this could be the demise of DPC if we're not careful. They could legislate it out of existence without even realizing it. Because we were just this tiny little bug climbing along, and we could be easily stepped on. So we formed the Direct Primary Care Coalition, which now has grown beyond our wildest dreams, and is run by a very large steering committee of really wonderful people who have continued the work and taken it forward. And Jay Keese, who you're going to hear from later, has been a stalwart supporter of DPC from the very beginning, and also a very wise and strategic leader for us. So thank you so much to Jay. So we finally did succeed in 2013 in getting DPC inserted into the Affordable Care Act. It's one sentence, but it was there, and it basically said that DPC, with an appropriate wraparound insurance plan that met the sort of qualified health benefit requirements, could be sold on the exchange. That never really happened right off the bat, but in its purest sense, but it did happen later. And I just want to make one comment about that. Political work is expensive, and it's people talk about cost centers and profit centers in businesses. This was definitely a cost center. It was a huge investment on the part of our investors and a huge distraction from what we were trying to do building the company. And that was kind of a theme along the way, is we were constantly trying to get focused and stay focused on what we were doing, trying to just build and run a scalable direct primary care practice. But we kept having these external forces come and hit us. And in order to fight them, we were really the only ones at the time who had any access to resources to do that, and any sort of presence to be able to do that at any scale. So we took on the role of being the leaders in that, and that cost us a lot of money. The internal challenges were quite huge as well, not the least of which was technology. At the time that we started Qliance, there really was no technology on the market, any sort of EMR or practice management system, that really met the unique needs of our model. So after trying to make it work with an off-the-shelf product, we finally said, forget it, and we partnered with a UK firm to develop a proprietary software system that would allow us to maintain a clinical focus while still gathering usable data. So something that wasn't formed around the concept of billing, but that did allow us to gather data in a format that would be intelligible to the rest of the world. So yes, using ICD codes and CPT codes for procedures, but not requiring E&M coding to bill for the visit at the end. So that all went away. We also needed to be able to manage everything from individual memberships to group contracts, and that's no small thing. So we had to kind of come up with our own system to do that. Since then, software systems like Hint Health and others have come around to be able to do that and have really done a marvelous job of building really well done systems to support us. And then the other thing we had to do is, as we were working with larger and larger systems, in order to be able to work with them and also to be able to prove our thesis, we had to be able to provide shadow claims to these entities. And I wanted to do this in a way that would not impact the providers at the point of care. I wanted them to be sheltered from anything to do with anything related to a claim. So the providers got to write their notes and sign them off as a visit, and didn't have to worry about any sort of E&M codes. On the back end, we would crosswalk those over to something that would be meaningful to the rest of the system. And that was a big development, because that then enabled us to start talking to these systems in the language that they could understand. Staffing was challenging. We had a lot of great and very motivated and very idealistic people who joined us all throughout the history of Qliance. We had to learn how to find the best fit, and we made some big mistakes along the way. One of the biggest was mistaking people running from the system to people who are actually running toward what we are doing. So we realized that we needed to really vet providers and other staff for their level of interest and commitment in doing something proactive and positive for the healthcare system, not just trying to escape from a really bad system. We had to balance the high access with staffing costs. As everyone knows, staff is your most expensive cost. Labor is always. In order to be able to sell what we were doing and deliver on our promise, we had to maintain high access. We gave up on the 12-hour days early on, but even so, even having clinic open for 8 to 10 hours a day on Monday through Friday without enough business is hard, because you have to have double shifts sometimes, and you have to have enough providers to be able to be there and available to people, but not so many that you're bleeding money. And if your enrollments are going up and down, you can't just hire and fire providers and other staff. That's very destabilizing. We learned another thing, which is that idle hands are the devil's workshop. I fully believe in that now. When we first started out and it was so slow, it was hard, because you've got a lot of basically thoroughbreds who want to run and are used to working at a very fast pace. And we wanted to bring down the pace somewhat, but not to a dead stop. And when you only have a few hundred patients and you have staff sitting around twiddling their thumbs, you got to work really hard to keep them busy. And it's very easy for people to get lost in unimportant details and start to get upset about things that are really not that important. So we spent a lot of our time early on just trying to maintain people's perspective. And the farther out people got from working in the fee-for-service system, the harder that got to do. They were more and more we lived in a bubble where we were happily doing everything that we thought was right for our patients and not having to deal with the pressures of the fee-for-service system. And you didn't want to get into a position where you were saying, well, at least it's not like the fee-for-service system. You've got it good here. You don't want to be saying that as an employer. The other thing we struggled with was, what is the right level of service for the price? And then how do we get everyone onto the same page with that? What we ended up having was a lot of people in our staff who had different ideas of what that meant. And funny enough, it was kind of on the extreme of people wanted to do so much for their patients, and they wanted to do it right now, and they wanted to fix everything right now, that sometimes that was impossible, and they would get very frustrated that things weren't working the way that they wanted them to. And they would get frustrated with leadership in that case. Quality improvement was always challenging. Hard to know what you're doing when you don't have good data, and hard to get everyone on the same page as to what's important. But that's true of just about any medical organization, I think. I talked about maintaining perspective. And then as we grew, maintaining a cohesive entity across multiple locations was also very challenging. But we did get results. So from early on, patient satisfaction scores were through the roof. I mean, that's an easy thing to test, right? You just survey people and say, what do you think? And we got incredible responses. We were just overjoyed. And it made sense. People finally found themselves in a place where they felt like they were important. We treated them as if they were important, because they were. They were our customers. We lived or died by how they felt about us, because for the most part, early on, people were paying out of their own pockets. And as we started to work with employers, a funny thing happened, which was that the HR departments, which hate getting complaints, that's their worst nightmare, if anything went wrong with us, the HR department heard about it. Well, if you think about it, what did they normally hear about? They would hear about the benefits plan being a problem. But people wouldn't go and complain to the HR department if they had a less than stellar experience with their doctor. They would never think of doing that. That had nothing to do with the HR department. They would talk to the insurance company maybe, or something like that. But because Qliance was a separate benefit that was created for them, they felt that that was something they should go to HR about. So we had to be even more on our toes, because, and we always encourage people, come to us first. If you have a complaint, we'll resolve it. But a lot of folks don't like to go direct, so they go indirectly, and that could be very hurtful. By around 2014, as we started to really have some decent data collected, we were starting to be able to show really definitively that there was a dramatic decrease in downstream utilization. So the rate of hospital days, the rate of ER utilization, the rate of use of advanced radiology, specialists, all that kind of thing, boom, way down. And I think a lot of you have seen the couple of slides we put out there about the data that we had. And because of the shared savings contracting we had mainly with the Medicaid program, we were really on a great track to be solidly profitable by the end of 2014. And in fact, I went to the Medicaid plan and I said, you know, you're paying us sort of a partial payment up front because you didn't want to take all the risk up front, and you're sharing the savings with us on the back end. And consistently, quarter over quarter, you're paying out substantial fees to us in shared savings. Why not now? We've proved ourselves, it's been a couple years. Why don't you pay us up front? That'll do a number of things. One is, it actually works better for you in regards to how you report to the state what you're spending money on. That's an obscure thing I won't bother you with right now. That was number one. Number two is, we as a company would be more viable because we would have much better cash flow up front, and we wouldn't have to go to investors for additional money to be able to float us until we could get that shared savings. And they agreed. But by the end of the year, we were supposed to have gotten retroactively paid that way back to the first of the year in 2014. But nothing happened, and by the end of the year, they told us, yeah, we're not going to do that. So all of our plans to be financially stable and viable and have great cash flow totally went down the toilet at that point. You're starting to get a feel for where things are going now. So this kind of rapid growth is always risky for any company. I don't recommend it, and I've spent many hours asking myself, was that the right thing to do? But we felt, and when I say we, myself and the board, that we had a really good partnership here. We had a Medicaid managed care company that was so in it with us that they had become an investor. And we had gone out on a limb and expanded for them and figured that that would mean that we had a long-term commitment with each other. So we went ahead and did it. But it cost us in many different ways. So whenever you have to grow that fast, you have to hire very fast. So we tripled our staff within 6 months, and we quintupled our patient population. So we had to hire really fast. That meant that the systems for quality control and hiring got strained. We still did pretty well, but there were definitely some problems we had to deal with from there. The culture had to shift very rapidly to this much more fast-paced, much more Medicaid-oriented care. The care was the same, but it was a much more intensive population to have to work with. For those who had been with us for a long time, that sudden leap in the pace of work, even though it was still not at the level that we had told everybody we would have to work at eventually, it was a big change. And any sort of big change in pace like that, it's like going from a standstill to sort of sprinting. That's what it felt like for people. And so there was a lot of internal dissatisfaction because of that. And then when you're growing that fast, it is really hard to keep control on costs because you just need everywhere. Everyone's telling you, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to expand this, we need to buy that, we need to, hire this person, I need more help, I need more help. And so, that sort of expansion ends up spiraling things out of control to some degree. The other thing is that we had taken this big bet and put a lot of eggs, almost all of our eggs, in the basket of Medicaid and the exchange, and the company became very vulnerable. It's generally considered a big no-no in business, but myself and a whole bunch of seasoned business people sat around and said, this is worth it because this is our chance to prove one of our theses, which is that this is good for everybody and it's not for the elite only. This is something that's good for everyone. Then fee-for-service started to rear its ugly head. And what I mean by this is it's really hard to fight against a very entrenched system that measures you against its measuring stick. And when that measuring stick is it's completely unrelated to what it is you're doing and trying to do. So in 2015, the Medicaid plan, having lost money, they determined that we were a big part of the cause of them losing money. And their statement was this: if we had paid fee-for-service, we would have paid a lot less for your services. So I don't know about you, but that was like hair-tearing moment for me. I got a few bald spots from that one. And I said to them, look, this is the whole point. If you had paid fee-for-service the way you usually pay, you wouldn't have gotten the results you got. You would have lost more money. We actually saved you money because you paid us this way. No, they didn't want to see it that way. I got a hold of the data that they were basing this off of, and as it is with data and data analysis, there are lots of different interpretations of it. But I thought that data showed actually a really hopeful and positive story. And I went back to them and I said, look, you're interpreting this wrong. You've got the wrong lens on this, and you're doing yourselves a disservice. If you look at it differently, and you look at it, step back into the frame of what it is we were trying to do in the first place, you'll see this was a roaring success. And that actually, if you hadn't worked with us, you would have lost an additional $5 million on top of what you lost. Well, I ran into the classic problem of, I don't know how many people in this room have tried to debate data and outcomes with insurance companies, but has anyone ever won that discussion? No? I'm not surprised. The history of this has always been, especially for primary care, well, if you'll just do this, that, the other, this 50 million things, and prove your value, then we'll reward you. That's the message that has been going on since I can remember. I remember heads of insurance companies giving talks and saying to primary care, that's exactly what we needed to do. And my answer was, how are we supposed to prove value if you're starving us to death right now? Who's going to make the investment that we need to be able to do this right so that we can prove what we can do? Never got us anywhere. The even more problematic part, I could bash insurance companies all day long, but really the bigger problem is that our public agencies that are supposed to be serving us as citizens and are supposed to be managing the money that we provide to them in taxes to pay for these kinds of programs are not appropriately aligned, as far as I'm concerned, with the right people and the right groups. And so here Washington turned over all of the management of Medicaid to these private companies, but didn't give its agency that runs this the power to arbitrate any disputes of any magnitude with providers. So when I went to the healthcare authority and said, help, I need help, they're going to crush us, the answer was, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. Unless they're violating literally the letter of the contract, we have no power. And so I said, well, what would it take to have that power? Well, it would take an act of the legislature. And I said, great, we got lots of experience with this. Let's do it. Oh, no. We have a lot on our plates. We can't do that. And that was the moment of the greatest disillusionment for me. Until that point, I had really quite good relationships with the folks in state government and had been really impressed at how supportive they were. They were thrilled about us. We were the subject of speeches that they gave about innovation in Washington State and all this kind of stuff. So I sort of naively assumed that when we were in trouble, that I could go to them for help. But that doesn't necessarily happen. So 2015, that was our difficult year, our special period, so to speak. So what happened was the plan came back to us and said, we cannot pay you the same way we've been paying you. And in fact, we're not going to pay you very much for anybody who is not engaged in care. So we're going to pay you a small amount for people who are engaged, because Medicaid capitation rates aren't that great. But we're only going to pay you $2 for anyone who's not engaged per month. And we said, $2? What are we supposed to do with $2? Like, we can't even work on engaging people in their care for $2 per person per month. And besides, wait a second, you're complaining that we didn't engage these people. You can't even reach them on the phone. You don't even have good phone numbers for them. What are we supposed to do? We don't even know if their address is good. Do you want us to drive to their houses and drag them in here and make them get care? That's not going to happen. But we had a choice. We could either say, no thank you to the new contract terms. They would have announced that they would give us 6 months notice and say they're going to terminate our contract. And we would have had 6 months to try to figure out what we were going to do. Or we could accept the terms, make the best of it, and try to figure out what to do from there. So the board decided they wanted us to continue on with them, accept the terms of the agreement, and figure out what to do over the next 6 months. So our revenue was cut by roughly 75% overnight in May of 2015. We had, at that point, 7 clinics. We had 125 employees. We had leases, 5 to 10-year leases in some cases with clinics. And that's really, really hard to reduce costs when you've got that kind of situation. You have severance contracts with your providers where you can't just lay them all off and then you don't pay them anymore. You have to pay out 60 to 90 days of salary. The other thing is that the board felt that we should start transitioning to a very heavily virtual service model. And we pushed back on this and said, we still have a lot of Medicaid members. And just for them, while virtual care is very valuable for them, it's not something we can force on people. And actually, that's true for our whole population. The whole idea of DPC is that we should be able to tune the care to whatever people need and what their situation is. So if we're actively trying to push people out of coming into the office so that we can cut down on staffing and push them to a virtual model, without having established the relationship and the trust, and without having the open door policy that we've had that makes people feel like whatever's going on, they can come to us and they can get taken care of, and we're the path of least resistance, that this is going to start to fall apart. But they said, sorry, that's what you have to do. It's the only way we're going to save money. So I said, okay, we'll give it a try. I talked about the revenue reduction. We went from, in 2014, looking like we were going to be doing a nice, healthy business to being totally down the tubes financially. In addition to this, to add insult to injury, the Medicaid plan claimed that they had overpaid us by almost $500,000 in 2014, but that they were going to be nice and they weren't going to collect it from us right now. There were other impacts of the Affordable Care Act that were interesting. While it was great to have so many people, in Washington State, I think we got everyone but, in a state of like 8 million people or something, all but 250,000 people suddenly had insurance. And so on the one hand, it was great because as a physician with a patient who needs something, it's great that they have insurance, especially if they have Medicaid. If it's the exchange, that wasn't so hot because they had this big deductible, but at least they had some coverage. And they got, the insurance negotiated fees, so they paid a little bit less maybe for the things that they had to get done outside of what we could do. So that was great. But it really shut down our employer business because employers were just uniformly, the doors started slamming in our face saying, not this year, not this year, not next year, just like let us get our feet on the ground with ACA, figure out what we need to do, and then we can talk. Okay. Another reason why we thought, oh, this is great that we have Medicaid to focus on because otherwise there's really nothing else going on out here. The ACA also really distracted brokers toward focusing on helping their clients with compliance and not from finding innovative solutions to help them. And then the third thing is the HSA prohibitions really blocked adoption by an increasing number of companies that were turning even more to those kinds of plans. We could not, for the life of us, find an insurance partner to really create a true DPC-based plan. We tried and tried and tried. We got very close in a couple of cases, but then at the last minute, things would fall through. And the other thing I think about the ACA that's really a shame, and I think a lot of us saw this coming, was that it really turned the focus back on insurance as the solution to our healthcare system's woes, not care. Big mistake. So we adapted, our investors got tired. So based on our experience with Medicaid, it actually forced us to start innovating for real. I think up until that point, I used to tell people, no, I'm not an innovator, this is not innovative, this is just basic common sense. We're just doing what primary care should be doing. All we've done is we've come up with a business model that supports the right kind of care model. It's really not that complicated. People in other parts of the world have figured this out. It's ask the patients. They understand that this is the right way to do it. So we came up with a model that was called Access to Active. And the idea was maybe we could get everyone to start thinking about putting everyone in the pool. And sure, we'll take a lower fee for people who aren't actively using care. And we don't want everybody to get medical care for no good reason anyway, even at the primary care level. Not everybody needs primary care every year. And in fact, I started thinking, our goal should be to make people so healthy that they don't even need us, right? That we can focus on public health and not even so much on primary care. And that only really the people who need care at any given time in their lives are coming into primary care. So we already were doing lots of telemedicine, which we'd always been doing anyway, but we had kind of beefed that up. So the access part was this low-cost membership where people had access to telemedicine services and an in-office follow-up if they needed it for some sort of urgent care issue. If at that point they decided, wow, I really like this, I want to sign up and be a primary care patient here, they could flip over into the active mode and then we would get paid more for them. So it was a way of adapting something positive out of a very negative situation. So we started marketing, got a lot of traction. Everyone was really excited about this. It really made sense. But the sales cycle, as I'm sure many of you know, is extremely long when you're talking about marketing to employers. Around the same time, the board did realize, yeah, no, we're not going to turn this around quickly. You can't turn around losing 75% of your revenue and having huge infrastructure in 6 months and expect it to look good. So they decided to move forward with trying to sell the company because they didn't want to continue to put in funds. They had put in a lot. I mean, by this point, we were at like $30 million over, 9 years. A lot of money. So they tried to sell the company to several different healthcare entities. It wasn't a good time to sell anyway. And honestly, Qliance was not in the shape that it needed to be sold. If I was another healthcare entity, especially if I didn't totally get DPC, I don't think I would have been interested in buying it either. But myself, and with the person who became my business partner, she and I came together and said, if we don't have to run this like a company that's going to make money for investors, we could really cut back on our costs and run this as a nice, solid business that would just bump along happily. And so we decided to buy back the company. As an owner-operated company, this happened in March of 2016. We were able to reorganize the business for more modest growth and profits. And like I said, that eliminates a lot of cost. You don't need a lot of high-level executives to do that. We vetted our business plan far and wide. People just fell in love with it. They said, this is so great. This makes total sense. You're going to be profitable in 3 to 4 months. So we figured, all right, this is good. We're going to be able to get financing if we need it. We're going to be in good shape. We talked to all of our customers. Everyone seemed really positive. That was great. And then I personally called everyone in the company and said, do you want to join? And to a person, everyone said, yep, I'm in. Let's do it. And I think that was one of the greatest moments of the company was, here we were facing a massive change in the way the company was going to be financed and run. And people were so dedicated, they said, yes, I'm in. And we had people saying things like, I'll stay until the wheels fall off. That was a pretty common statement. But very quickly, resistance started to form. And this is where the whole story starts to get very sad for me. Because I started to see parts of our system in this country that revealed some of the much deeper cracks than I ever realized in terms of how they affect healthcare. Number one was finance. So being a woman and being two women, one of them African American, you might as well kiss financing goodbye. And I'm not kidding. We heard things like, well, you know, I loaned money to a couple of women and they went south on me last month, so I'm a little bit sour on it right now. And I would say, what does that have to do with us? What about our business plan, which you said you loved, and our business, which you said you loved? What does this failure of these other two women have to do with us? No answer. We had friends who said, look, I hate to tell you this and you're going to want to punch me, but if you would just get a man on your team, you would get financing. I'm not joking. This is like verbatim. And I spoke to people in banking, in venture capital, in all these different areas, and I said, what is going on? They said, oh, yep, this is standard. And it's hard to prove that there's that level of discrimination, but it is very real. So here I thought that maybe there was something wrong with the business. And yeah, it was a bit of a risk. But I maintain to this day that had we had even a really solid line of credit, we could have withstood a lot of the problems that we ended up facing later on. So that was number one. Because we couldn't get good financing, we had to go for increasingly expensive money. And let me tell you, loan sharking is alive and well in this country. Alive and well. The deregulation of banking and lending has run, it's just wreaked havoc on this country. And the majority of the money that comes through these lending companies that are sort of the lower tier ones comes from hedge funds. And they make a ton of money off of this. This is where they put a lot of their investment money. Even the sort of better ones that are not quite at the bottom of the pit, they were proudly telling me that, well, we're backed by some of the largest banks in the country. And they're talking about 15 and 20% interest per year. And I'm like, wait a second. You said Wells Fargo, you said Bank of America. I talked to them. They wouldn't loan me money. But they can give you money, and you can loan it to me for 4 times the interest rate that I could get from a bank? Why, yes. That's how they're making their money. So that's how banks get to do high-risk lending, because they can't do it directly. And we only became high risk because of what happened. The other thing that started to happen was, I think losing our big-name investors caused some worry among the customers that we had. So we lost Expedia and we lost Comcast, and next thing we know, we're turning into 2017 with a deficit of $200,000 a month in revenue. That was a lot to deal with. So at that point then, rumors start to go around that we're not doing well and we have problems, so people don't want to sign contracts with you, and you can see it just starts to kind of spiral from there. I was successful in getting our Medicaid contract renegotiated to a much better level, but they killed us with 1,000 cuts by just never assigning us any more people. And if any of you have worked with Medicaid, you know there's a lot of turnover. And if you don't replace members who fall off, the numbers just keep going down and down and down and down. So by the time we closed, we only had about 12,000 patients. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit here. The end. Not quite ever. So despite all of this, we were just pedaling as hard as we could. And I had managed to get us on the verge of closing on a very large SBA loan that would have cleaned up all of our unfavorable debt, would have given us some runway, etc. And we were just about to close a very large contract with this new model. Simultaneously, the loan falls through. The new client announces that they're going to have to delay for 9 months. And a loan consolidator, supposedly, who we had hired to help us with some of this debt, turned out to be a fraud. The guy had done the same thing during the mortgage crisis, and the feds had let him out to do it again. And he stole $200,000 from our company. Well, that was our payroll. And literally from a Friday to a Monday, we had to make the decision to close the company. So that Monday, May 15th, 2017, I had to send out an email to the entire company and say, get on the phone at noon, mandatory company meeting. And I had to get on the phone and tell everybody, pack up your stuff and leave. That's it. We're closing. Call the patients for this week and tell them that we're closing and we don't have appointments and you must leave by the end of the day. I can't pay you. And yeah, that's not a phone call that I would ever want to have to make again. So that was the end of us. So, is there any good news out of all of this? This is pretty depressing, right? Well, yeah. So 4 out of the 11 remaining providers at that time have opened up their own solo DPC practices. So that's pretty good. That's almost 50%. I was left to talk to the thousands of people who were calling and saying, oh my God, what do I do? And it wasn't quick phone calls. These are people who got on the phone with me and they wouldn't hang up. They were crying. They were distraught. They said, oh my God, what am I going to do? This is the only healthcare I've ever had that made any difference. You guys were great. What can I do? What do you mean I can't get an appointment? I'm like, we're closed. They've actually bolted shut one of our clinics. The landlord will not let us back in. So anyway, but it was bittersweet, but it was really nice to hear from all these people who said, my doctor so-and-so was the best, and your staff so-and-so was the best, and I don't know what I'm going to ever do without you. We could be happy in knowing that thousands of people were helped to achieve better health, and many of them regained their lives. I sort of started to talk about the term, let's undisable people. And we did that. We had people who got off of Medicaid because they were so much better after working with us that they were able to get back to work. And despite becoming basically a huge target for the system's hostility towards this, we were able to embody, at least in some ways, a promising change from the grassroots. We got big enough to matter. We got big enough for people to really be afraid and to want to destroy us. I'm going to try to get through these a little bit more quickly. More important good news, I think, from a big picture is, look at this room. DPC has been growing and flourishing across the country for the last 10 years. I think the movement has gotten through its painful childhood. It's now becoming a force to be reckoned with. The insurance experiment of the ACA has underscored that insurance is not the primary solution. And we have collectively started to expose the hypocrisy and corruption in the healthcare system. From the very smallest level when we help people negotiate better cash pricing for something, all the way to the bigger level as we fight at the state and national level to get things changed. The costs were very high. I'll just breeze through this. Financial losses were huge. Everybody who worked with us, our employees, me personally, everybody lost money, big and small. I personally faced some professional losses. Speaking up for what was right cost me, and I became a target where even my license came into question. And I realized, wow, I might not be able to be a doctor. That would be interesting. I started making plans to leave the country at that point. Personally, it's been incredibly distressing. I mean, this has been probably one of the hardest and worst couple years of my life. But you learn a lot from that, and you start to, transform yourself in response to it. Patients lost a ton. 12,000 people lost access to some of the best care they'd ever had. And then I think publicly, our failure made it easy for others to point to Qliance and say, see, it doesn't work, when that is the farthest thing from the truth. So my biggest message to you today is just remember, revolutions are bloody. They are not pretty at all. Those with power and money do not give them up willingly, and revolutionary movements are very threatening, and that's what this is. We threaten the very essence of what it is that holds together a healthcare system in this country that costs us 20% almost of GDP. There's just a huge gap between stated policy goals and the willingness to change, and I now am much more skeptical about what I hear. We were the first major casualty, but there will be more. And we should expect that. And we should be supportive of each other when that happens. We also have to keep our guard up. The more successful we are, the more the system is going to push back and the tactics are going to get uglier. And I think passive resistance is one of the worst. I really experienced this with the Medicaid plan, that just simply by stonewalling and not responding, that was probably the worst and most frustrating thing that we could go through. And ultimately our patients are our best allies. I went and opened up my own solo practice, and I can't tell you how much that saved me. To be able to go to work every day and sit down with people who really valued what I did helped rebuild me as a person after this whole experience. So finally, why this concept of tunneling through the rock? Well, this is a little story here about building a tunnel through the Hoosac Mountain in the 1800s. And I won't read this to you because we're running out of time, but basically this was back in the day when the techniques for boring tunnels was very primitive. They got about, 10 feet in, what was it? They got in like a few feet blasting the rock and then got stuck. And everyone said, oh my God, huge failure. It was just an engineering nightmare. Everyone was like, we should have never done this. It's going to cost way more than we ever expected. It was supposed to be $2 million. It's going to be $21 million, something like that. And everyone took huge hits for that. But what happened in response was we said, we got to figure this out. So engineers got to work and figured out more and more and more techniques for getting through. And eventually the tunnel was completed. Lots of people died. I mean, they started using nitroglycerin. That stuff is very dangerous. And over 200 people died building this tunnel. So it got done, and thanks to the mistakes they made, now we can build tunnels the way we build them. And we still have trouble every time, but the technology is getting better and better, and the techniques are getting better and better. So my point being, I feel like the last 10 years were spent tunneling through rock. And we tried all kinds of different technologies, and a lot of people got hurt. But we got a long way through, and there's a long way still to go. So I urge all of us, pull together, beware of our enemies. Let's be careful about not attacking each other internally. Everybody's innovations in this room and out there in this country count. And everybody's mistakes really count, and we have to learn from them. And we have to celebrate them. That's what actually makes you move forward, is making mistakes. So with that, I want to say thank you to all of you here who over the years have given us so much support, and me personally so much support. And the one thing that gives me such great hope is that this is still happening. You know, Qliance died, but the movement didn't die. We just did our part, and now we are no longer, and you all take over and take it from here. Have a few more things. Thanks, you guys. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we have a few questions in just a few minutes. So, first one was, if you were starting again, would you still team up with Medicaid? I would, but I would be a heck of a lot more intelligent and wary about how I did it. But, you know, one of the things I really thought about a lot is, how do you learn from your mistakes? Would you do it again? Or did you have to do that to be able to get to where you are today? So I'm going to change the question a little bit and say, should we work with Medicaid? And my answer is yes, we should work with everybody. It's really hard. And there are some folks I know who are here who are starting to do that in a much more sophisticated way with a lot of learning now behind them that hopefully is going to help make those more successful. And you know, I think one of the biggest things I can offer is a cautionary tale of what to watch out for and when to walk away. But I still think it's really important. I think one of the things that gives legitimacy to our movement is to not abandon anybody, to make sure we still continue to say this is for everybody. Everybody deserves this kind of care. Can you put together your whole experience in a book? It sounds like a great idea, but boy, the concept of writing a book seems so daunting. But me and my business partner have talked about this many times. I hope so someday. I've never written a book. I have no idea what it would take. Right now, I'm still feeling pretty exhausted by all of this, but hopefully someday we'll be able to put something together. With your lobbying experience, do you see any hope if we unify in one voice to stop the deterioration of our healthcare system and give physicians a voice? Something I skipped the slide, but I'll say really quick. Regardless of your politics, let me share with you really quickly. I had an opportunity almost a couple years ago to go to Cuba. And while it's an incredibly poor country, the wealth is really well redistributed. And so people have great teeth. You don't see people with rotten teeth. People look healthy. People look well enough fed. In fact, they're having problems with obesity just like everywhere else. I got a chance to meet with and understand how they've structured the system. And it really brought me to tears, to be honest with you. It was so frustrating to me to see that it is possible to organize a healthcare system completely differently, with primary care and public health really at the core of it, and nobody questioning that. The entire healthcare system there is organized under the Ministry of Public Health, Every single decision about health and health care is made by that ministry with all the input from everyone around the country. So every dollar that's spent on research, medical education, services, drugs, equipment, everything is part of a larger plan to give the maximum benefit to folks. And they've done some unbelievable, amazing stuff. They actually have developed some drugs that we don't have anything close here. Like they have a drug that you can inject into diabetic foot ulcers that heals them within 3 months. And we're talking ugly, horrible foot ulcers. They've reduced their amputation rate by 80% in 3 years. And this is all data verified by the WHO. It's not like, it's stuff that you can find proven anywhere. The biggest sadness to me was, wow, if I was here, Qliance wouldn't even have a place. It would be meaningless. Like that's just what they kind of do. Do I think they could learn a little bit from us? Sure, but we have much more to learn from them in terms of the kind of system that makes sense. The thing is, though, that when you have a primary care-based system, everything costs a lot less. They're able to do what they do for $500 per person per year. Now, they could use some more money. I think $1,000 would be much better. But that includes all their costs for medical research. And they've come up with vaccines and drugs that they sell all over the world that help millions and millions of people. So we really have no excuse for what we do here. I don't know exactly what the road is here to putting us at the center, and I may be an outlier here in saying this, but when I see Jeff Bezos and JP Morgan, all those folks come together to do something radically new in healthcare, and they hire a surgeon, as wonderful as Atul Gawande might be, he is a surgeon to run the thing. And Atul Gawande only last year got religion and realized how important primary care is. I don't know if any of you saw that article. That should be us. They should be hiring us. There shouldn't even be a question about it. And we have to insist on that. Oops, I lost my screen.
Yep.
Maybe that's a sign.
Let's
take yours.
I'm an old curmudgeon, right? 32 years, solo family doc, Cincinnati. Created a system in the 90s, grew to be 450 docs, HMO, competing with HMO, went out of business. I'm sorry. I have great respect for you to stand up and tell your story. Thank you very much. What I want, unbelievable fortitude. What I would like for you to help us with, we physicians are our greatest enemy. We are the problem. So, for instance, I'll say in Cincinnati, we've got a handful of docs trying to do this. Everybody says, this is the way to go, this is the way to go. I go, there's no single model, honestly. So I've been a hybrid for 10 years. And everybody goes, you can't. You got to be pure. And I go, let's not fight each other, dumb us down. We've done this for too many decades. We need to join and say, it's about patient care. So I want you to help us with pearls to get through the egos of us physicians. We are the solution. We know that. We just don't believe it because docs are selling out, and there are only 10 family independent docs in Cincinnati for family medicine, 10 internists. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The hospital systems aren't the answer. So please, real pearls would be wonderful sooner than later. Thank you. Right.
Well, let me make one quick comment. Thank you for your comment, and I'll step down. But I think you're absolutely right. Ego is a huge problem. It's the wrong kind of ego that's a problem. We have to have a strong ego and believe that all of our expertise and knowledge and commitment and orientation towards taking care of populations is correct. And if you ever have a doubt about this, look around the world and look at some of the really successful healthcare systems and look at how they're structured. It's always founded on solid primary care. Now, their primary care systems are having problems all over the world. But let's look at those other systems and say, well, why are they struggling? What's going on? What are the issues? I've talked with people from countries all over the world who said, how do we take what you have is amazing. Well, actually, we're having all these problems. Okay, what are the problems? Well, they're having problems with physician burnout, and they're having problems with, utilization patterns in patients and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, these are problems that can be solved. They're not easy, but they can be solved. And not necessarily just with the DPC model, but you have to fit it to every particular situation. But I think that we fail to have the right kind of ego and the right kind of confidence to just say, no, It's not about all this other stuff. It's about getting people the right kind of care at the right time, and most of the time keeping them out of trouble. Let's remember that healthcare is not something that people like to do. In fact, I hate it. I don't like getting care at all. I avoid doctors like the plague when it comes to me as a person, right? I love being a doctor. But I always remember that my patient doesn't really want to be there. They would much rather be doing something else. They'd much rather be healthy. They'd much rather not have to worry about it. Maybe they're okay with some prevention, but I mean, really I'd rather go, play around and do something fun. So if that's the case, then we should be trying to keep them out of trouble. And we're good at that. If we set ourselves up properly to do that, whether it's a hybrid practice or a group practice or a solo practice or a big company or whatever, it doesn't matter. As long as we are delivering on that promise to get and keep our patients healthy, to make them not even really need us, if at all possible. And for us to fight amongst ourselves about what's the right way and what's pure and what's not pure is folly. And that's where the bad ego comes in. And I was guilty of it too. I fully admit that. It's really easy to get caught up with your own propaganda, so to speak, and I'll be the first one to admit that. And I had to keep kind of reminding myself constantly, like, don't get cocky, don't think this is a done deal. Like, I spend a lot of my time just worrying. It's nice not to have to spend every day worrying about stuff and having lots of employees to worry about. We have to stay humble in the sense that, no one of us has the right answer, and there's no one way of doing things, and things have to evolve anyway. So we do ourselves a disservice if we fight with each other, with the folks who are sticking their neck out and trying to make things happen, even if some of it might be misguided or they might make a big mistake. Nothing about what anyone does is impossible to overcome. What is impossible to overcome is if we fight amongst ourselves, because then they win. That's exactly what our opponents would love to see happen, is to have us fight amongst ourselves, take each other down, doubt each other, limit each other. That's where we lose. So that would be my advice. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Bliss.